Good morning. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Thursday, December 9th, 2021. It's 9:04 a.m. My name is Ty Mentor, Chair of the Board. To my left is Vice Chair Commissioner Gary Edwards. To his left is the County Manager, Mayor Chavez. To my right is Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell and Commissioner Carolina Mejia, present through Zoom, as well as Public Works and budget staff. The topic is final budget deliberations. We got most of our work done yesterday, but we have one or two small things to address this morning. I have a hard stop, but well before 11:30.
Yeah, it shouldn't take more than an hour, Commissioner, this morning. That's my, well, we'll get you there before.
Okay, so we don't anticipate being here more than an hour this morning. The meeting is live streamed on the Thurston County YouTube channel, and I'll turn it to Assistant County Manager.
Okay, the last item in your budget, we actually have two items for this morning. One is to review public comments that you received on the fee increases for your water and sewer departments. And then to make a decision on whether or not to raise the fees. And then the second item is just a review of the provisos that have been drafted for the budget. And we'll start with the fees, and I'm gonna turn it over to Tim Wilson.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Wilson, Water Resources Manager with Public Works. So here to address some questions that came up in yesterday's hearings. I thought I would start with a little bit of background on this issue. So as a reminder, the county manages 7 separate utilities serving 4 communities. Most of these utilities, with the exception of Grand Mound, were taken over by the county at some point as a result of a state mandate due to poor financial and operational management. The cost of operating these utilities increases every year due to escalating costs in repairs, supplies, power, staffing, and investment in infrastructure. Public Works has a long-term strategy for ensuring the success of these utilities, which include the following. A rate study, which the board authorized and is currently underway by our consultant. That rate study is intended to evaluate the system needs and inform the board on future long-term rate setting, as well as explore efficiencies that could be gained within the management of the utilities, including but not limited to consolidation of the utilities. We're also in the process, the later stages of the process of updating all of our water system plans for all of the separate utilities. This will put the county in a position to be eligible for state-sponsored grants and loans to assist with the management of these systems. We're also engaged in asset management improvement so we can better track our infrastructure, prepare for long-term replacement, and just more properly manage these utilities. So we're really working to set these utilities up for long-term success and are making some good strides in that direction. In the short term, we have proposed a 3% increase to address the immediate operating cost increases. So we can think of this as a stopgap measure. Those costs are continuing to escalate. We have a long-term strategy in process, which includes that rate study to really take a look at our utilities and inform the rates going forward. But in the short term, our costs are going up, and we need to cover those maintenance and operation costs. The outreach process for the proposed rate increases has been quite robust and has included starting with a June briefing to the board regarding the rate increases, the need for those rate increases, and what those would look like to the ratepayers. The result of that board briefing was direction from the board to begin the outreach process to inform ratepayers of those increases. Staff went forward with that. We created a web page in which ratepayers could have a look at the need for the rate increases, what the impact to their individual bills would be, and provide comments via that website to staff. We also created bill inserts and mailers and other outreach to the community. And probably most importantly, we engaged our two utility advisory committees. As you know, we maintain utility advisory committees for both Boston Harbor and Tamashan. Engaged them, gave them a presentation on the proposed rate increases, had good dialogue and discussion with them, and in the end, had their support for these increases. The outreach culminated in the public hearing on November 9th. As a result of all of these outreach efforts and the public hearing, we only received 2 comments. Those were comments received at the public hearing itself. One of those comments was from a ratepayer in the Grand Mound system, and they were opposed for various reasons. Timing was a concern during COVID. They had recently moved from a larger utility, and as you know, larger utilities, because of economy of scale, the rates are generally a little bit lower than these small utilities. They also had concerns over stagnant wages and so on and so forth. The other comment that we received was from a ratepayer in the Boston Harbor utility that testified that the increase should be smaller than the 3%. And that was, those were the 2 comments that were received at the public hearing. We had no additional comments that came in at a later date that staff is aware of. I believe you asked yesterday about the impact to customers' bills. I have Karen Weiss with us this morning, and she's going to share a good slide from that briefing back in June that kind of summarizes the increase.
Okay, so I'll try and attempt to share my screen. Please tell me if you are able to see it.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen.
Be able to see that? Okay.
Yes.
Depends what you mean by see it. I see the title. That's helpful.
Yes, a little bit bigger. Thank you.
Okay, so what this is summarizing, and Karen, please chime in if I misstep here somewhere, but basically it is summarizing the overall impact of a typical residential customer in each of the utilities. So Olympic View, which is a sewer-only utility, the monthly increase for the average customer would be $3.17. For the Tamashan utility, the average customer would be impacted by $7.34. For Boston Harbor, it would be $5.24. And for Grand Mound, it would be $4.80. And so I would, well, it looks like you stepped up to maybe get a closer look, but I would just open.
We're watching, Tim, we're watching.
Okay, any questions on the impact to customers or anything else we've covered?
Tim, do you mind if I add just a couple contextual things?
No, please do, Karen. Thank you.
So I know Commissioner Minzer, you had asked, I wanted to just provide also some history of the rates. So in each of the years, 2017 through 2020, we did have 5% annual increases in our rates, with the exception of Boston Harbor, which had higher rate increases because they were not covering their M&O costs. They were just eating into the fund balance. And so we had to have higher increases in 2017, 18, and 19 for Boston Harbor only. In 2021, we did not have any increase in our rates, and that was in respect to COVID and the implications that that might have. I also just we don't have in front of us today, but you do have somewhere in your budget packet the 10-year financial plans. And I would say, one of the reasons we're doing the long-term rate study is because the utilities are not currently financially stable over the long term. And the reserve funds within the next 3 to 5 years for all of the utilities with the exception of Grand Mound, are showing negative projected fund balances. Now, clearly that won't happen. We would have to space out our activities, but it is important that we continue to at least cover our M&O costs and contribute to the reserve, at least in some way. And then the other thing I just say is just for an environmental scan, we did reach out to some of our neighboring utilities, and they are all anticipating rate increases. They range. City of Lacey is 6.3%. City of Olympia, the water is up 2%, but their sewer treatments 3%, and their other sewer base rate is 9.1% increase. And the Thurston PUD has a different rate structure, but their increases are ranging between 3.5% and 4.3%. And I think, if I'm correct, your lot also has an annual escalator built into their rate. So I just kind of wanted to give an environmental scan of what the surrounding communities are doing.
Ready for questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Mejia.
So Karen and Tim, what's the impact to the customers if we don't do a rate increase this year?
The impact to the customer is that they wouldn't have an increase in rates. The impact to our financial situation is not good because we are not able to be covering our maintenance and operation cost increases. We're not contributing to the capital reserve funds. I mean, keep in mind that the water and sewer utilities are not supported by funding other than water and sewer utility rates. So, there's not outside funding that comes to these. There's not general fund support. So over the long term, we would be eating into a fund balance that we really don't have cushion in, so to speak.
So with that long-term market study though, aren't we moving ahead maybe before that market study comes back?
The market study is not going to show that our rates, the purpose of the market study, our costs are what the costs are to support our utilities, right? There's not, other than potentially looking for efficiencies in administration through a potential consolidation. The market study that we're doing is really a rate study to look at alternative rate structures and ways that we could potentially consolidate, and so we wouldn't have varying rate structures among the different utilities or rate amounts among our various utilities. I do not anticipate our market study is going to show that our rates are going to decrease because our costs are going to continue to be what our costs are, so you operate the utilities, but there may be a different way of structuring it so that, for example, Tamashan has a much higher monthly rate than does Grand Mound. So you might be looking for some economies across all of the different utilities. Does that make sense?
It does. So overall, the customers wouldn't have impact to their services regardless of, the impact would be basically long-term financially.
That's
and then
correct.
of course, that would bleed down to the customers later on. Okay, thank you.
If I may.
Go ahead, Robin.
So I would just say that while the customers may have no increase this year, eventually the board would have to raise the rates to cover costs in the future, and the future rate increase may be higher. So instead of small incremental rate increases, you may be looking at one very large rate increase in a future year. The alternative always is to supplement through the general fund. And for the infrastructure needs, the board has often used REIT 2 to be able to build these utilities and loans. As we were talking about yesterday, you're about to abolish the Grand Mound Debt Fund because we did issue debt for the infrastructure in Grand Mound and we've just paid it off. We've also done big assessments in these utility districts to be able to cover costs.
I guess the other alternative will be to reduce level of service. And the reduction level of service never is a good strategy related to sewer and water. And but that is certainly an option as well, Commissioner.
I would just add to Ramiro's statement and say, yeah, that is definitely a possibility. Without a short-term rate increase, it could affect operation of these utilities. And think about, Boston Harbor Utility that are all step systems out there. Quite often our operators respond to alarms after hours in the middle of the night. And without, adequate funding to support overtime and the proper operation of those, we could definitely be seeing a reduction in customer service. So that's a great point.
Commissioner Edwards?
If we make these rate increases as proposed, what's the ending fund balance look like that you maintain versus if we do not make those rate increases that you've proposed?
Well, we need the financial plans that are in your budget binders.
Should we go get them?
You could go get them, yeah.
Okay, give you that.
I got one, yeah.
You can get mine too.
A little break, I'm gonna get our binders.
Very good.
Well, I'll wait for Robin to get here to tell me which page to look to.
Yeah.
Well, the first reserve fund that you can look at, I don't, if you can find is on, it's numbered PW16, and that's the Boston Harbor Utility Reserve.
PW16.
If I recall right, the printouts were not necessarily in sequential order when they were printed out and put in your book, so that might be the challenge.
Are we talking about Fund 4210?
Correct. So this is a reserve fund. So the answer to the fund balance question is, so first off, in the M&O funds themselves, we maintain a 2-month ending fund balance target to cover cash flow and needs. Anything above that, we transfer to the reserve funds to fund our future infrastructure needs. And so again, all of what you see and what we're going to talk about is going to point to the need for that rate study, but also to the fact that our utilities are not adequately funded. That's what you're going to see for the long-term needs. So when I point out on PW16, this is the Boston Harbor Utility Reserve. When we keep a 2-month ending fund balance over in the M&O fund, the reserve fund, you can see we're okay through 2023, and our projection then moving out beyond 24 is a negative ending fund balance. And again, clearly, we would have to look at our infrastructure needs, but and either defer or delay doing replacement. And I know there's a conversation about, as Robin said, there's always opportunities to ask for REAP funding or ARPA funding.
That was what? 42.29.
Oh,
How drafts. And also how bids also drafts.
And that's the 10-year plan.
Yeah.
These are very lean funds.
Very lean. And also just for context, remember we have, I think Tim mentions it, but we have 800 customers. So I would imagine that for any increase, we're going to hear from somebody who doesn't like an increase. And so, 2 customers, it's a pretty low percentage. It's a 0.25% of our total customers vocalized unhappiness, so to speak, with the rate increase. What you didn't hear from, unfortunately, is from the advisory committees who are supporting of this modest rate increase, especially in light of what Robin said. They really articulated their preference for ongoing small increases as opposed to it, so they could plan sort of for some stability for them rather than large fluctuations and variances from year to year. That was definitely a part of those conversations with the utility advisor.
Karen, did you say there was 800 total customers for all the utilities that we serve?
Correct.
And are some of those commercial?
Yes. We have about 80 commercial down in the Grand Mount area.
And that's the only place the commercial ones are located, right?
A few in Boston Harbor with a park, and what else we have there? School would be considered that, yeah.
Oh, do we supply water for the school out at Boston Harbor?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so, okay, I've got those numbers in front of me, but just what kind of dollars are we talking about in the end? If we raise the rate, it's going to give them roughly how much? And if we don't raise it, it stays at what number here?
Okay.
total amount collected is what you're asking?
Yeah.
The financial plans include the proposed fee increases. Is that correct, Karen?
They do, yes.
Yeah, I just want to hear them from, I mean, I've got them here, you can point out to where the numbers are, but the public can't take a look at what I'm looking at.
Right, so in terms of the revenues, then it will be a 3% decrease to what you have.
Which would be just roughly. I mean, do you have-
Right, well, roughly, if you look at 2021, for example, I'm looking at Fund 4340, the Grand Mound Sewer Utility. And in 2021, revenue is anticipated to be $1,209,000. The proposed with the fee increase in 2022 would be $1,225,000. So that would be reduced by roughly what, $20,000, a little under $20,000 in total.
So that's what raising the fee means to the county is trying to keep track of things, is an extra 20,000.
Right.
16,000.
Yeah.
Okay,
Grand Mound Sewer is 16,128, and water is just under 38,000 for Grand Mound. Boston Harbor, water is 16,390, 10,470 for sewer, and Tamashan is 50. Let's see, for sewer it's 5,859, and for water is 3,482.
Commissioner Mejia has her hand up.
Are you done yet?
yeah, well, I'm gonna ask one more thing
Go
about, under the COVID-19 money that we got through, they specifically said that we could do sewer upgrades or
Infrastructure
Infrastructure
projects for
projects.
water and sewer, yes.
Water and
And in
sewer.
fact, you have set aside and you release $300,000 to begin that process.
And does that cover some of the things that we're talking about here? Could that fund pick this up if we wanted to give the citizens a break? Because I guess that's what
This
we're talking
is one
about.
thing is infrastructure and this is operations.
And so you're saying that you cannot use it for any operations?
Not the M and O, no,
But Karen mentioned leftover goes into the capital reserve.
into the capital reserve. We cannot use ARPA money to put into a reserve fund. We could reduce the amount needed in the reserve, but that's already factored in, if you will, because the projects that you've approved in ARPA were already approved prior to this budget being put together.
But also, Commissioners, remember you have allocated over $20 million for rental and utility assistance to all citizens in Thurston County who may need assistance in that. And that has been, and you get a report every week as to how much we have spent in helping citizens who are in need related to COVID and rental and utility assistance. So every customer, every individual has the opportunity to access that help.
The question remains, there is some stripe, however small, of the rates that are, and we know it's inadequate, that's why we were thinking of using ARPA money, but there's some amount of money from rates that go toward capital improvement, which we now have, I believe, $5 million earmarked from ARPA. We haven't pulled the trigger on that, but that was the
For the
bucket
water
that
and
was
utility.
created.
That's true.
And that has got to help shore up these shortfalls that we're talking about for the, provided we can, obviously we have to be able to cover basic M&O or else then you have a problem. But if it's like you're covering M&O, but you're just not able to meet the needs of future infrastructure upgrade, well, that's what we have ARPA funds to do.
For instance, I kind of wanted to do those upgrades now with that money. If we're talking about a need, do that capital improvement out of the ARPA funds, that's all.
Karen, approximately how much each year is transferred from the M and O revenue into the reserve funds?
That's right here.
Yeah, looking at the financial plans, it's the operating transfers from the M&O funds. So for example, Boston Harbor in 2022, it's 120.
Going back to Boston Harbor?
No, it's
The fund balance, and then
all of them apply that.
and then the future years out, it ranges between 45,000. Now, I would like to say, and I'd like Tim to confirm this, our current reserve plans do not include the major infrastructure work that is being discussed today to be funded by ARPA, right? So these projects that you're seeing that are on this capital improvement plan in this 6-year, which is reflected on the 10-year plans, the CIP work, the infrastructure projects that Tim is scheduling in for major infrastructure replacement to the tune of 3 and 4 million, I believe, for Boston Harbor and Tamishan, those numbers are not even reflected in our 10-year financial plans. That's outside of that. Tim, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Karen. So our engineers are moving forward now with pre-design for water and sewer line replacement, which are projects that are not on the current CFP. This is thinking longer term down the road. These aging distribution systems and collection systems, trying to get ahead of that. Very important project, very expensive project that would provide some relief from operating costs via system leakage, the amount of water that we pump out of the ground, treat to drinking water standards, and then put out into our system and then is lost within the system, could reduce the amount of response to main breaks and things like that down the road. But it's much more longer term than our current CFP addresses.
Guys, I need to go back to the history piece that Karen went through quickly. So you said you were talking about 5% a year for how many years?
So 5% each year from 2017 through 2020.
But you said Boston Harbor had to be more than that. What was, you didn't say how much more.
Boston Harbor was 10% each year in 17 and 18. And they actually had 20% in 2019 because the water aspect was not covering their 20%, I'm sorry, 20% water only in 2018 because their water rates were not covering their M&O costs. The sewer rates were having to subsidize. So as I delved into that and was able to show that, the advisory committee, understood, and so we had to implement some higher rate increases for those two, or for those.
That year we had issues with the water reservoir
Yes, we did.
at Boston Harbor. They really created a pinch.
Almost lost the license.
I think that was before both of you, 2018, but we had issues with the reservoir at Boston Harbor. That in fact, I think we have to shut it down for a few days.
So, kind of following Commissioner Edwards' question regarding MARPA, that was going to be my next question, but I'll throw in the infrastructure bill. And do we know if any of that funding comes through? I mean, do we know if it can be used for,
It will not be able to be used for M&O.
What about
The
upgrades?
maintenance and operations piece that is,
That's the issue. And yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the infrastructure bill, it will come and to replace or upgrade the infrastructure.
So
Roads,
we could
sewer,
use
water.
ARPA money for the upgrades?
we don't know yet. We don't know what's in that bill and we don't know
So
how to
there's a-
access it.
Well, I thought they were specifically mentioning sewers.
Okay, two things, if I may. I think Commissioner
Water.
Mejia is talking about the infrastructure bill that just passed a month ago.
And ARPA.
Yeah, and you're talking about the ARPA funds.
I'm talking about the ARPA we already
Yeah,
got.
the ARPA funds, you already set aside, and in fact, you set aside $7.2 million for stormwater upgrades, I believe. And you released 300,000, and that's what Tim's talking, the engineers are working and detailing how much it will be.
But those are estimates for 4 specific projects. If you'd like to earmark more of the ARPA money for these purposes, then we need to go through the plan and see what you'd like to reduce that you've already earmarked.
Robin, also, if I could just add, we want to make sure when we're looking at these reserves and we're talking about ARPA money for specific projects, the other thing that we need to make sure we have adequate funding for is for emergency types of repairs. We have to have a capacity in our budgets to be able to respond to emerging needs. And that's part of the process or part of the purpose of these utility reserve funds, but I don't know that we can necessarily use ARPA funding for those types of projects either.
Possibly, but I would also direct the board's attention to, for example, Fund 4210, the Boston Harbor Utility Reserve. When you look at 24 out, even doing very modest capital projects, the 115, 120,000 is not the kind of big project we're talking about here. This fund is in the red.
It's in the red now.
It's going to go in the red.
Karen, would it be important to talk about some of the experiences other local jurisdictions have had with audit findings at all, or is that a conversation for another time?
I think it's just important. I know at the briefing that we mentioned too, just for board's awareness, I know that, and you're having these discussions and that's critical, right? There has been audit findings that utilities that, like in Mason County had one, that the fund wasn't stable and they weren't planning adequately for capital needs and future infrastructure needs. So, all of these are proposed within the context of making sure that we're well prepared to respond to and take care of our utility needs.
Yeah, I understand there's always a risk for an audit finding. But I think what we're discussing today is a legislative action to increase or not sewer and water rates.
So going back to capital projects, for the Boston Harbor, let's say for example, I mean, this year we spent $500,000 on capital projects. Couldn't we use ARPA funds to kind of pay us back or refund us back for those?
So any work had to have been done on or after March 5th. We could certainly look and see what this work was and when it was done and if it's eligible. So it's not a simple yes, because it's gotta meet certain criteria, it's gotta be done at a certain time. So maybe is the answer. Sorry, it's just, it depends is the right answer to almost anything.
But it doesn't have to go back, because there's allotted expenditures in that category every year. And I guess just to boil this down to where I'm having heartburn is, I mean, the 5% and now it's 3%, we've gone through the community advisory committee, I'm okay. Boston Harbor really bothers me. Hitting them with 4 straight years of 10 and 20% and then saying that we need to go up again when we have this, and I have trouble with that. And so I mean, it seems like we could, the numbers that Karen gave, I think is a total of $54,000, that would not be collected if we did not increase Boston Harbor. There's capacity within capital project expenditure for all of the ongoing years that we could use ARPA funds to make that shortfall up. Yeah, does that mean we don't spend the 54,000 on something else? It is, but if you say we already allocated 7.2 million as a placeholder, and I have not, pulled my personal trigger, so to speak, that I'm gonna authorize that much, but that's an easy backfill to show a little good faith toward not hammering people that have gotten 10 and 20% rate increases. That's my thinking. I mean, talk me out of that, but I just don't, that one's really bothering me.
I guess my follow-up to that would be, for some of those major repairs, okay, you're saying we've earmarked so much money for, I don't know, the rent deal. But I'll just use that as an example. We don't have to spend it there if it doesn't get spent. I mean, what's the rate of expenditure that's been going out? Because a lot of people went back to work now.
When did I need Romero in the room, because there's a projection for when that money's gonna be gone. We're already lobbying for more from Department of Commerce for the rent and utility assistance.
And then are we the highest utility charges in the state?
No.
Or are there
Not
some
by
that
far.
are way higher? Are we in the middle, or?
So I'm gonna defer to Public Works. I should not have jumped to that answer, but.
I'll jump in and say no. I'm aware of other local systems that are higher than ours in the Thurston County or Lewis County where I live. We haven't done an analysis of that. That's part of the work that our consultant will be doing as part of this rate study to compare more of an apples to apples comparison utilities of similar sizes, because they're unique and they are more expensive to run when you have a smaller rate base. I would just real quickly add a comment, hopefully to help with your concerns, Commissioner Mentzer, on Boston Harbor out there. As Karen mentioned before, there's been ongoing dialogue with this steering committee, who are comprised of individuals, mostly of which have had long careers in utilities. So they understand the financial side, they understand the engineering and design side. They are very aware that they were running in an unsustainable fashion, and that was the result or the driver for those larger increases early on. They're also aware that there's ongoing costs associated with just regular O&M and regular inflationary considerations, but there's also additional regulations that are being added all the time. And an example of that is, Ecology is currently issuing a nutrient removal requirement, a nutrient removal permit that will mean more requirements for our utility, more monitoring requirements, more staff time. So the program's increasing as well. And so that those are conversations that have been had with that local community. And if it's of any assistance, they are engaged and aware.
And if I can again provide a little bit more history on the Boston Harbor, I was looking back even further at the historical rates, and between 2012 and 2015, we had 2 years where there were no cost increases for Boston Harbor. And so I guess this is again to that point of having gradual, incremental, reasonable annual rates. The reason that in Boston Harbor's specific instance that we ended up with those 10% rate increases because we had prior years where we didn't have rate increases that covered the cost. So they ended up with these larger variations. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Tim, I am familiar with that nutrient removal issue in the general permit, which doesn't affect law because law's already doing that, but it would affect a tiny system like that. And what is the plan for addressing that? What will we have to do that we're not doing now?
Yeah, well, so the permit is just now being issued for that. We know that it will affect both Tamashan and Boston Harbor sewer utilities. I've asked Joe Plahuta, who is our new senior water resources engineer, to take the lead on evaluating that permit and providing a summary of what the requirements will be, similar to like our stormwater permit. The requirements and conditions are phased in over a number of years. The initial requirements, we believe, will rely heavily on monitoring and understanding what our loading is from those facilities, and then developing a plan to work with those. I would add, for transparency, I think Ecology is also interested in or putting together a grant program to help some of the utilities with that, although that hasn't been formalized yet. And I would also add that we are planning a briefing to the board when we have full understanding of what that permit is going to mean to the utilities.
Commissioners?
Well, I think they've made a pretty good case. The only thing I'm concerned about is if we do capital improvements, and if we can, we ought to be using that ARP funding. But if we can, that's all. And that'll take some of the load off of future increases. But I think what they're doing now is, like Karen said, doing an incremental increase rather than a big whammy a couple of years from now.
I would be happy to bring the current ARPA plan.
I found it.
Oh, you've got it.
So let me walk you through.
That's not current, but yeah.
And related to utilities, to the stormwater. What you have set aside is 1,780,000 for the sewer main at Tamashan, $2 million for the sewer main in Boston Harbor, 1.5 million for the water main in Tamashan, and $2 million for Boston Harbor water. And out of that, you release 300,000 to begin the engineering of those utilities.
Right. Right. So what I'd be happy to do is to bring in the current plan that includes those projects, and you can give us some direction what other earmarks you'd like to reduce for us to redirect, if you still like to do that, to cover these costs. Because we can absolutely take a look at these and see if any of it is eligible under the ARPA rules.
The funding you've just mentioned, can that sit there for a while until we use it?
That is
That's set
absolutely
aside. You-
set
you-
it earmarked for
Yeah,
these
but I mean,
projects.
don't we have to have spent like by 2025 or something like that?
Actually, we have until 2026.
As long as
and-
as long as we have obligated by December 2013.
Oh, no, 13? 23?
No, 24. We
24.
obligate by 24, and then we can spend by 26. And Public Works is very aware of the time frame that they have to set this all up.
And that's gonna take a load off of the ratepayers for a future,
7 million.
Certainly will in the long term.
Yeah,
And I think
okay.
that is certainly the investment that the board is doing.
Right, and when you look at these funds, they could never support something like this. What it really takes the load off is REIT, and to some degree, these ratepayers.
And there's a lot of, a couple elements in here in staff provided to the board initially statements. This is somewhat stuck up to continue until we get the study of the consolidation in place to see how that is gonna work, how those projects the board may fund under the ARPA. All that is gonna have an effect on the utilities, hopefully on the positive, at least on the major utilities.
Anything more needed then?
Unless the board has any, what will be the direction of the board on this one?
you know, I guess I'm gonna go along with the staff proposal.
Okay.
So that is a positive yes for the fee increases for all of the water and sewer utilities as proposed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right. Last item is the, Provisos.
Do you bring your copy that was sent? No. No.
I have a copy here of the list of provisos. You didn't print them, I sent them rather late last night. There you go. Do you have them,
Yeah,
Romero?
probably.
Oh, yeah, I've got a list from Mr. Pettit. Okay, so these are the provisions, if you will, that restrict the use of some of the appropriations that you make. And I'm just gonna read down this list, and if you have any questions, just stop me. So the first proviso is, many of these we just have in them every year. The first is that the Board of County Commissioners may require approval to fill positions at any time. Now, this is related to a hiring freeze. The board hasn't had a hiring freeze, a broad hiring freeze for quite some time. Right now, what you have is departments, offices are free to fill their positions. Departments need approval from Romero to fill their positions. And we go through a HR process where it's reviewed by me, it's reviewed by Romero, and ultimately Romero must approve. So, however, at any point in time during the year, this proviso, if the economy suddenly tanked and you needed to preserve funding, the board could implement a broad hiring freeze. Without this proviso, you couldn't do that. Item number 2 says that $100,000 that we collect in property tax millage that goes to public health and social services for behavioral health will be transferred to the Thurston Mason Behavioral Health Administrative Service Organization, the BHASO, and that they may only use it for persons with mental health problems in accordance with state law. And that is because this particular property tax is restricted to the uses in this law. So this proviso governs the money. It basically tells public health that they have to pass 100,000 through, and the BHASO has to use it in this fashion. And it also states when the payments will be made.
Let me ask a question on that. So if we pass that money through, they use it according to this RCW.
They do.
But what about if we were to put something in place for mental health problems in our homeless communities, for an example? Would this cover, would BHO take care of dealing with that? Or, because right now we have, what do we call the courts that we have kind of off campus here? ITA courts. So does this cover those expenses, or do we have to dip in somewhere else? If we give up this money to the BHO, does that mean we don't have it to deal with something like that if we put together?
The county does not have it. And the county is not required to pass this money through to the BHASO.
Well, I guess that's all I'm wondering. I don't know what their funding total is. I mean, Ty and I sit on that board. I don't know what effect that would have, whether they've depended on it or not. But I've been hoping sometime along the way, we're gonna be able to get some mental health treatment for our people that live in these homeless camps.
I suppose I should have asked this question earlier in the process. Does the board want to continue to pass through this money to the BHO? Because the county could keep it and spend it as we see fit in accordance with this law.
Right,
But,
and, you know, as I remember the conversation with the BHO, like 4 years ago.
It was part of the agreement when they
Part of the
split
agreement.
off from the county.
Going back to your comment, Commissioner Edwards, I believe the statement here is all inclusive.
Which one?
All inclusive. Services, only for services for persons with mental health problems. So it is all inclusive regardless of their condition of homeless or not.
Yeah, but we don't have any, once we give it to them, we don't, well, we are the board.
Well, you sit on the
You
board.
have some
Okay.
influence on how they
Well,
spend
then
this
maybe
money.
that's a mute
And we just went over our budget last month, and I remember that the Mason County, I'm sure there's an interlocal agreement or
Oh,
something.
everybody kicks in.
Mason County, and Mason County has chosen a percentage, which, if you, because I was out, remember I asked the question,
Yes.
like, why is Thurston 100,000, and then Mason was like 98, 109, you know, it was like 103, and I was like, why is Thurston giving a flat 100, and the answer was, well, we've chosen to give a flat 100, and Mason chose a percentage, and it seemed like it pretty much evened out, but my point is just that Mason is contributing a roughly equal proportion to, and it's built into the BHO budget, so that would be a more complex conversation, I think.
Okay, well, just forget I asked that.
Okay, so we also passed through a portion of our liquor distribution revenue from the state of Washington to the BHASO.
When you say a portion,
Yeah, it's 10%. And the county is required of the amount of liquor money that we receive from the state. The county is required to dedicate 10% of that to support alcohol or drug addiction programs.
yeah,
We're required to do so. At the time, before the BHASO became the BHO,
or vice versa.
that what they were called an RSN, and the RSN managed this money. So when they peeled off from the county decided to just still let them manage this restricted funding that we receive from the state. So we pass it through.
I guess I'm gonna do another question around kind of what Commissioner Edwards left. First of all, how much do we get from liquor revenue?
Oh, that is a really, I'd have to look. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I can get it for you, but I want to say that this is roughly $50,000 that gets
Oh,
passed
so it's
through. It's not a lot of money.
So we keep 500,000 back or for
Yeah,
50 or something like that.
and it goes to the general fund.
And it does go.
That money goes to the general fund for any legal purpose.
Oh, okay, okay, good
Or
enough.
any, so we just
Any
have to
purpose.
give a certain percentage.
10% has to be used for alcoholism and drug addiction programs, and we just pass that right through to the BHASO.
But then, kind of like, it could be used for, let's say, our DUI and drug court program.
Yeah, that would probably fit.
Wondering, questions?
Something to think about in the future.
So I think that the BHASO though uses it for treatment programs. Yeah. Item number 4 is all classifications or reclassifications of positions authorized in this budget need to have the agreement of human resources. And that is so that we know that the new classes actually reflect the jobs that are projected or the work that needs to be done. So the offices and departments need to go through HR for final approval. Number 5 is that this has been in your budgets for a while now. This is the School Resource Officer Agreement with North Thurston. It simply says that at least 75% of the cost has to be provided by the school district. And the similar provision in number 6 for the agreement with the Rochester School District. So we've had these for some time. Number 7 is, says that the positions, this is related to those Involuntary Treatment Act cases, that the positions that the board has approved in the clerk, superior court, prosecuting attorney, and public defense offices must be paid for in full by the BHASO. Now that's a state law that they have to pay those costs, but the board conditionally approved these positions, saying that these offices can't spend more than they get from the BHASO. Item number 8 is that this is a little bit complex. This is the money that we pass through to E911, TCOM 911. Because this is a tax, it must be administered by a government. So county government has to receive the tax, and then we pass it through to TCOM. Because it is a government fund, you cannot spend more than the appropriation that the board puts in the budget. And so we have to set the appropriation high enough to cover all the revenue that comes in so that we can pass all the revenue through. We don't keep anything for TCOM. And so this proviso says that we will only pass through as much revenue as we receive, even though the amount that you appropriate may be higher. Because again, the appropriation has to be high enough. A couple of years ago, we received more revenue than the appropriation. We couldn't pass it all through to TCOM because we didn't have appropriation authority, and you can't legally exceed that. So we rolled the money into the next year, and TCOM was actually pretty unhappy about that.
No, but also the board entertained a budget amendment to increase the appropriation.
We did that last year.
Yeah.
Because 2 years ago, we ran into a problem.
So,
And the revenue's been coming in so unpredictably high that we're just gonna set the appropriation level quite high, but we're not gonna pay out more than we receive. So that's what proviso number 8 is all about, and proviso number 9 is the exact same situation for the tourism promotion area. We're gonna set the appropriation high, but we will only pass through the amount that we receive in revenue. And for the TBA, we actually retain a little bit to cover our administrative costs of managing that fund. Number 10 is the $300,000 that the board appropriated for the climate mitigation plan this year. It says that any amount that's left will be carried into a future year and that this money can only be used for that purpose. I looked to see how much we'd spent this year. I think we've only spent about $6,000. We've received
our $44,000 out of there.
Is that a contribution
For
towards the other?
That was like toward the
For the
total
amendment,
steering committee.
for the amendment for the next interlocal
For the
agreement,
TRPC piece.
we haven't got to the agreement yet. We're still,
But this year though, we had a phase.
early in the year, yes. I think we
I
paid that.
haven't received the bill. If
Oh,
someone paid
TRPC.
something, they haven't sent me the bill for that, so it's not been paid.
So it may be coming.
So people need to send me bills for
So
items under
Time is
this,
ticking up. I'll ask Katie to send an email.
or else we'd spend it from some other line item.
All right,
but,
well, let's just figure that one out, 'cause it should have been
For the interlocal agreement.
for the
amendment number
Right.
2021 ILA. Yeah, that we're,
Because the
that we're operating on
upcoming is about 60.
55.
Right, so we're tracking this amount of money, and any amount not spent in this year will
Yep.
carry forward to 22, and we'll just continue that until the 300,000 is gone. Item number 11 is, I'm not sure which year this was, but the board approved these 3 positions contingent on receipt of grant funding. Grant funding continues to come in, so we still have these positions. If the grant funding should ever stop, we will abolish these positions.
What kind of positions are they?
That's a good question.
They have numbers
I
on
have to
it.
look them up.
I was just curious.
We can certainly find those for you. Patty, maybe you could look that up while we continue down the list? Okay,
Sounds good.
all right. Number 12 is the assessor is allowed to shift the costs for this position. This is one of his appraisers between the general fund and the real estate excise tax fund as he sees fit. The board appropriates funding, and then when you approve positions, you attach them to a specific fund, and offices and departments are not allowed to just move them between funds. This proviso allows the assessor to do just that for this particular position. Item number 13 is so that the auditor may transfer funds. And the board, a previous board, established an elections reserve fund, and that is because the cost of elections and the revenue for elections is on a roller coaster, as you know.
This is a stabilization.
Well, it's part of the state. We're gonna get more revenue now than we used to from the state, but still, the cost of election goes up and down. And the auditor used to come to the board every year and say, this year I need less. This year I need more. Please increase my appropriation. Okay, I'm giving back money this year, decrease my appropriation. And then in the presidential election year, she'd need a whole lot more. And this was, Kim Wyman did the same thing. It was just the cycle. To flatten that out so that there was not, because it became difficult to find the money to appropriate in that presidential year. To flatten that out, we took a look at the 4-year span, estimated the average. The board appropriates the average, and establish this election reserve. So in the 3 years that are not presidential election years, the auditor has more than she needs, and she transfers that little bit more into this reserve fund. And in the presidential election year, she takes the money out of the reserve fund to pay the high election costs in that year. It creates a flat appropriation amount. You don't have to go, it gets us out of the yo-yo effect and provides stability both for the general fund budget and for the auditor. So this allows her to put that little bit of money out of the general fund into the election reserve.
Commissioner Mason, what is your hard stop?
I'm gonna leave in 5 minutes. Board can continue my absence, but I have to be with customers.
Okay. Number 14 is 90,000.
If you have any
Yeah, I'll just read this.
questions,
Number 14 is 90,000 to the auditor's office that is solely for increasing the boundaries from 3 commissioner districts to 5. And that can only be spent if we hit the population threshold. Number 15 is 500,000 of the ARPA money to district court for the tech program that they want to run. It's like, ankle bracelets or, yeah.
Turn devices.
And it requires that they report the program results to the board each year. Number 16 is that the position in public health for diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator may not be filled until we have the approved equity plan. Number 17 is we have 100,000 in the first year and 200,000 in the second year for treatment sales tax in public health, specifically to enhance diversity, equity, inclusion, and they cannot spend that until we have an equity plan. Number 18 is we have a position for district court, the mental health and veterans court coordinator, that can only be filled if they hit the caseload threshold of 55 or more. Number 19 says that the position you've approved for public works, the accounting assistant, project position that is to assist with ERP implementation can only, that's only approved so long as the plan is to replace the CAMS system. And finally, number 20 is the board appropriated this just under $10,000. It was a request from the sheriff. You appropriated it to public health, and this is the instruction that they must use the money to purchase Narcan for the sheriff.
I think Patty has an answer on those questions on
Patty, yes.
item 14.
Who are these?
It's 2 community health nurses and 1 education outreach specialist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I go, did anyone have more they wanted to say about Superior Court letter? I know.
No, I did have the chance to have a conversation with presiding judge, and I did inform her of the preliminary decisions that were made yesterday. Obviously, she was not happy, and but she understands. And I explained that my suggestion was for the board to consider a one-time versus an ongoing, and that was the direction the board decided to take.
Okay.
And maybe I'd have one other comment was when I talked to the presiding judge, somebody was listening to her yesterday, I guess, and she said the only reason they didn't schedule with Commissioner Mejia was they talked to you earlier, a week before, about the same thing. So.
Yeah, and I told him, I think I was the first one yesterday, and I told him, I recapped what the conversation was and just said, you know, I'm not gonna spend any more money. If you wanna talk somebody out of a switcheroo, that's a conversation.
Well, I'll say what I mentioned, and I'm in maybe the minority voice, but if it truly comes out that you can't make everything function with what you've got, you can always come back for, ask for a budget extension.
I think I was last to talk to her.
Oh,
And
okay.
she mentioned that you had invited her to come back in the midterm and that you had said if there's anything to swap, we talked about what they might swap. They don't want to give up anything that the board has approved. And what we talked about was that we could explore if at least part of this might be eligible for ARPA, but it would have to offset some other thing that they've asked for in the backlog. And
Yeah,
that we already can't afford
My
that.
conversation with presiding judge was about coming to midterm, and I
Oh,
said,
okay.
I said traditionally, the board does not
I told her I didn't know the
entertain
rules.
any request that perhaps didn't approve in the previous, during the normal budget process. But I'm not the board, and the board can open up to whatever they may consider adequate, so. I think it was a good conversation, but, and I don't think it's, at least from my point of view, there is not need for a follow-up.
I gotta go then. Are we adjourning?
Yeah.
Oh, so I can just, okay. Then we'll just adjourn this morning, and thanks, everybody, and do we have anything more today? No.
We're on a roll for next Friday.
Okay.
Thank you.